The story begins, not with gunfire, but with something far quieter, the sound of an egg cracking in an army kitchen. Somewhere in 1941, the yolk slides into a pan, bright and hopeful, but by the time it reaches the front line, it will have rotted into a sour, useless mess. This, of all things, becomes one of the greatest logistical crises of the Second World War. How do you feed millions of men scattered across 5 continents with a food that cannot last a week? How do you turn fragility itself into a weapon of endurance? The problem seems absurd, almost comical, yet in war, absurdities often decide victories. The United States entered the war with abundance, but abundance meant nothing if it could not travel. A single egg could nourish a soldier or poison him, depending on time, temperature, and luck. Refrigeration was a luxury reserved for hospitals and officers' mess halls. Cargo ships crossing the Atlantic faced weeks of heat and salt air. Trains to the Pacific were delayed by snow, rust, and sabotage. And the simplest breakfast, a scrambled egg, threatened to collapse the world's most ambitious supply chain. In December 1941, when America formally joined the war, military planners met inside a Pentagon office lit by a single bulb. Reports from field kitchens told the same story: food wasted, sickness rising, morale sinking. One logistics officer wrote bitterly, "We can make planes faster than we can keep eggs fresh." The irony cut deep. Industrial giants defeated by a breakfast table problem. But there was something philosophical, almost spiritual, about the question itself. Could the most fragile object in nature, the thin-shelled egg, become the symbol of endurance? Could fragility be transformed into permanence? At that very moment, a quiet decision was made across laboratories and farms, a decision that would change not only how soldiers ate, but how the world thought about food. America would not abandon the egg, it would reinvent it. In the months that followed, hundreds of scientists, chemists, and farmers would join forces in one improbable mission to make the egg survive war. A mission that began with a simple, defiant idea: if a shell could not protect life, then chemistry must. Steam would replace shells, heat would replace time, and from fragility, something eternal would be born. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell us, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? The docks of New York. Spring 1943, crates stacked higher than rooftops, marked perishables. Handle with care. The smell came first, a heavy, sickly sweetness that clung to the air and drew clouds of flies. Inside those wooden boxes lay the silent casualties of a logistical war, millions of eggs that had died before battle. The heat was merciless. Cargo handlers worked under a noon sun that turned the harbor into an oven. By evening, men were gagging as they pried open the containers. The eggs inside had exploded in their shells, their liquid contents oozing through the cracks. What had been meant for the breakfast tables of soldiers on distant fronts had become a swamp of decay. One quartermaster wrote in his logbook, "We lost more eggs this month than bullets fired in Tunisia." That was no exaggeration. In May 1943 alone, over 12 million fresh eggs spoiled in U.S. coastal warehouses, victims of time and temperature. The cost was not just food, it was morale. No eggs meant no breakfast. No breakfast meant no rhythm to the day. For men fighting in mud and steel, something as simple as breakfast was an anchor to sanity. In the mess halls of North Africa, cooks cursed and improvised. Some tried powdered milk mixed with flour to fake scrambled eggs. Others boiled hardtack biscuits and pretended not to notice the taste. But rumors traveled fast. Soldiers joked bitterly, calling their rations the Great Eggless War. At home, newspapers said little. But those who worked near the ports knew the truth. Workers on the docks would light cigarettes to mask the smell. One of them, a young woman named Helen Boyd, later recalled, "The air was thick with rot. You could taste it. We didn't need to see the headlines to know the war was wasting away right there." That rotting stench became a symbol not of failure, but of challenge. Every general knew logistics could win or lose a war, yet no general had planned for the death of eggs. It was an invisible battlefield, fought not with tanks, but with thermometers and crates, somewhere between science and desperation. The question emerged, what if eggs didn't have to rot at all? Could you strip away their fragility, their shell, their need for cold? Could an egg survive a desert, a jungle, an ocean voyage? That question spread quietly through Washington and Chicago, carried in memos marked Food Research Priority. It reached university labs, factory floors, and dairy councils. The war against time had begun. By the end of that summer, the smell of rot would no longer haunt the docks. Something was about to disappear, and with it, one of humanity's oldest limits. In a cold Chicago morning of late 1943, a group of food scientists stood around a metal table inside the National Drying and Packaging Laboratory. The windows were fogged with steam, the air thick with the scent of milk and eggs. A colonel from the Quartermaster Corps handed them a folded sheet of paper. It contained an order so absurd it drew nervous laughter. Make the egg disappear, but still edible. The men looked at one another in disbelief. Dr. Percy Spencer, a chemist known for inventing dehydration methods for milk, murmured, "You want us to make breakfast into dust." The colonel didn't smile. Exactly. A soldier can carry bullets through the desert. He should carry eggs too. So began one of the strangest scientific experiments of the Second World War, the quest to make an egg live without a shell, without moisture, without decay. The laboratory's early days were chaos. Machines overheated, yolks turned green. The smell of sulfur filled the hallways. Assistants wore masks and burned through endless notebooks of failed ratios: too hot, too dry, too slow, too fast. One engineer recorded in frustration, "We killed 10,000 eggs today, all of them died again." Yet the war left no time for failure. By autumn, they built new dehydration chambers, steel cylinders that could blast heat through trays of liquid egg in seconds. The goal was to remove 98% of the water while keeping the proteins intact. Each test was like playing chess with nature. Finally, one December evening, something extraordinary happened. A tray emerged from the dryer coated in fine golden powder, smooth, fragrant, and astonishingly stable when mixed with water hours later. It scrambled perfectly in a skillet. The egg had vanished, yet lived again. The scientists stared in silence. They had not destroyed the egg. They had reinvented it. Word spread fast, within weeks. Industrial giants like General Foods and Kraft joined the project. New plants opened in Illinois, Minnesota, and Oregon. America had cracked a new kind of victory, invisible, weightless, nearly eternal. A clerk wrote in her report, "It's strange. We spend our days making something disappear, yet every ship that sails carries more life because of it." Outside, Chicago's winter winds howled across the river, carrying the faint scent of cooked egg drifting from the chimneys. Inside those walls, chemistry had achieved something religion once promised: resurrection. The egg was gone, and yet, for the first time in history, it would never die again. By the spring of 1944, the miracle had gone industrial. The fragile kitchen ingredient that once died in crates was now reborn by the ton, in vast Midwestern plants. Endless streams of liquid egg flowed down silver pipes into roaring dryers. Within seconds, the golden dust burst out light, warm, and worth more than gold itself. The U.S. government recorded over 150 million pounds of powdered eggs produced that year. To soldiers, it became known as the soft gold of victory. Each pound of powder replaced nearly 8 dozen fresh eggs, cutting shipping weight by 90%. In a single train car, America could now send the equivalent of 3 million breakfasts across the ocean. Every number was staggering. A factory in Iowa processed 250,000 eggs an hour. Trucks lined up for miles outside the gates, delivering crates from local farms. The scent of cooked yolk drifted over the cornfields. Workers said they could taste victory in the air, literally, from those factories. The gold dust fanned out to every corner of the war. Ships carried it through the Panama Canal toward the Pacific. Freight trains rattled across deserts and mountains, bound for California bases. From there, the powder traveled to Normandy, Saipan, Casablanca, and the jungles of New Guinea, where American cooks stirred it into life with nothing more than a cup of water and a flame. Soldiers marveled at it. The idea that a spoonful of dust could become breakfast seemed like magic. In diaries and letters, they called it the ghost egg, the miracle ration, or simply home in a tin. But behind the wonder was the precision of modern industry chemistry scaled into empire. The Office of Price Administration tracked every shipment, every ton dried, every crate sealed. This was no longer just food, it was logistics as art. A few skeptics complained. "It doesn't taste like an egg," one sergeant wrote from Italy, "but it tastes like victory, and that's good enough." In that sense, the powdered egg became more than a ration. It was a statement that America could feed armies not through conquest, but through creation. Every grain of yellow dust represented a triumph of science over decay, of order over chaos, of patience over perishing. On the docks where real eggs once rotted, now stood warehouses stacked with tins marked U.S. Army rations, dried whole egg, product of the United States of America. The smell of rot was gone. In its place hung a faint, warm sweetness, the scent of victory preserved. The factories never slept, inside their steel walls, under clouds of steam and the constant hiss of compressors. Thousands of women worked shoulder to shoulder, day and night. The war had taken their brothers, husbands, and sons, but it had given them a mission in the hum of machines and the scent of drying eggs. Rows of conveyor belts glowed under fluorescent lights. Liquid eggs shimmered in stainless vats as women in aprons and hairnets measured, stirred, sealed, and labeled cans marked U.S. Army rations. The sound was hypnotic, the roar of dryers, the rhythmic clang of tin lids, the murmured songs that echoed above the machinery. At the American Egg Products plant in Neosho, Missouri, Supervisor Martha Lane, age 32, kept a small diary. One entry read, "We smell like breakfast all the time. The scent sticks to our hair, our clothes, our dreams, but it means the boys won't go hungry." Her line became something of a slogan on the factory floor. The women joked that they were cooking for the world. Some brought photos of soldiers and pinned them above their stations. Others painted tiny flags on the cans before sealing them. For every hour worked, nearly 6,000 eggs were saved from spoiling, turned into powder that could travel from Kansas to Burma without a refrigerator in sight. Steam clung to their faces. The air was thick and humid, smelling of heat and sulfur. The labor was grueling, but it carried a strange pride. "I'm not at the front," one woman told a journalist, "but my hands are touching the breakfast of freedom." Outside, train whistles echoed as cargo cars loaded with golden tins departed toward coastal bases. Inside, the women kept moving, driven not just by duty, but by rhythm, the pulse of a nation feeding itself through science and sweat. There were moments of laughter, too. They traded gossip about the soldiers' letters they'd read in newspapers, one infantryman joking that powdered eggs made him dream of my mother's kitchen. The women smiled at that. In a way, they were all mothers now, cooking for sons they'd never meet. Underneath the scent of eggs and metal, something deeper stirred a belief that work done with care could reach across oceans and touch a soldier's hand. And though no medals would be pinned to their uniforms, their labor left its mark in every breakfast that began another day of war. The golden dust that left their hands would soon circle the globe from factory floor to battlefield mess kits, carrying with it a warmth that machines alone could never make. By 1945, the golden tins had followed American soldiers to every corner of the world, from the beaches of Normandy to the ruins of Berlin, from the coral atolls of the Pacific to the frozen ridges of the Ardennes, wherever the U.S. Army marched. Powdered eggs marched with them. In field kitchens built from scrap metal, cooks cracked open the tins, poured the yellow dust into dented pots, and mixed it with rainwater or melted snow. The result was never pretty. It stuck to the pan, smelled faintly of sulfur, and often turned rubbery. Yet for soldiers far from home, it carried the one thing that mattered most: memory. Private James Larkin, a 22-year-old from Ohio, wrote in his diary near the Siegfried Line, "It tastes like nothing, but it smells like home. When we fry it, everyone gets quiet. For a few minutes. We aren't in Germany. We're just men having breakfast." Across the Pacific, Marine Corporal Sam Fuji scribbled a note on the back of a C ration box while waiting on Saipan. "I'd trade my cigarette for one real egg, but this powder keeps me alive." His humor hid the truth for months. Powdered eggs were the only steady source of protein for millions of soldiers. By mid-1945, the Quartermaster Corps reported serving over 2.1 billion powdered egg meals across 3 continents. Each meal was a tiny act of defiance against hunger and distance. In bomb-scarred towns, children sometimes gathered around American field kitchens, staring in awe as cooks poured yellow dust that turned into breakfast. One sergeant recalled giving a spoonful to a German boy who whispered in disbelief, "Es ist wie Zauberei." It's like magic. The powder had become more than a ration. It was a quiet symbol of connection, of something warm and familiar in a landscape of rubble. Even enemies could recognize its miracle. For many veterans, the taste never left them. Decades later, when they smelled eggs frying in peacetime kitchens, they felt the same ache, a mixture of relief and nostalgia, as if that faint sulfur scent still carried the weight of all those mornings under fire. And so a question lingers for us today. If you had lived through those years, eating the same powdered breakfast every day in mud and smoke, would you still call it home? Would you have tasted comfort or only survival? Tell us in the comments what food today reminds you most of home, even when you're far away. When the war ended in 1945, victory tasted not of champagne, but of something far humbler, the faint sweetness of powdered eggs still lingering in warehouses and mess halls. The ships that once carried weapons now returned loaded with tins stamped U.S. Army rations. What had begun as an emergency measure soon became a quiet revolution in food itself. The war was over, but the invention refused to die. Powdered eggs found their way into bakeries, hospitals, school cafeterias, and international relief shipments. 1 million tons of American surplus would feed children in war-torn Europe through the UNRWA relief program. Their first taste of protein after years of starvation. Factories that once thundered for war adapted for peace. In Wausau, Wisconsin, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The same machines kept running not for the army now, but for the world. Workers packed cartons labeled for civilian use. Housewives learned to bake with the new miracle ingredient. Recipes appeared in Good Housekeeping and Life magazine victory cakes, Liberty pancakes, Freedom omelets. Dr. Lydia Roberts, a nutrition scientist who had helped design the wartime ration, wrote to a colleague in 1946, "It is no longer war food, it is civilization's safety net." She was right. The powdered egg had transcended war, it had entered daily life. Yet behind the triumph lingered quiet ghosts. Many of the factory women returned to silent kitchens. Some soldiers could never again eat scrambled eggs without remembering the taste of fear and fire. And yet, they ate them anyway because survival has its own flavor, bittersweet but human. In 1950, during a visit to one of the original Chicago plants, an aging engineer named John Harlan stood before a new conveyor line. Reporters asked what it felt like to see his wartime invention still running. He smiled faintly and said, "We didn't just dry eggs, we made hope shelf stable." The phrase would outlive him. By the 1960s, powdered eggs became part of global food security programs. In drought zones of India and famine-stricken Korea, they appeared again, the same soft gold dust, feeding the living long after the war that created it had ended. It is strange to think that a story born from rot and urgency became one of endurance and nourishment. What began as a desperate experiment against decay evolved into a symbol of resilience, proof that even the smallest invention can echo across generations. And as time erases names and faces, one image remains a single spoon dipping into golden powder, rising through a beam of light. The dust swirls, glows, and for a moment, becomes breakfast again. History often remembers the loud victories, the tanks, the generals, the flags, but rarely the quiet ones. Powdered eggs never won a headline, yet they won mornings. They gave warmth to the coldest dawns and turned scarcity into survival. Behind that humble dust lay the combined genius of scientists, the patience of factory women, and the hunger of soldiers who learned to taste home in the unlikeliest form. Even today, their legacy lives in every instant meal, every ration pack, every flight tray that defies distance and time. It reminds us that progress is not always thunderous. Sometimes it hums softly through the vents of a drying machine, or clings to the hands of a woman sealing a tin under the hum of fluorescent light. Perhaps that is the true miracle of war, that amid its chaos, humanity keeps finding ways to preserve life, to dry it, to ship it, to share it. And somewhere, perhaps, a veteran still wakes before dawn, frying real eggs in his kitchen, for a moment. He pauses, smiles, and whispers to himself, "They still smell the same."